I'm the manager here at the Local First Arizona Economic Resource Center. And for the past month or so, we have been putting on a webinar series where our aim is to continue to support our organizations throughout the state, especially in our rural areas. And we are supporting them upping their capacity to prepare for, find, apply, manage grants, everything in between and after. This afternoon's series is Grant Management and Reporting with Quaylen Pipkin, one of our amazing contractors that we use. Grant writers, strategists, project management, you name it, Quaylen can do it. We are so thankful she's here. Just some quick notes. This recording will be emailed afterwards, along with all of the supplementals that are here. This will also be placed online in our learning lab, and all those materials will be up there. An email will be sent with all of this information afterwards. At any time, you can speak up in the chat or unmute and ask Quaylen a question. And with that being said, let's just get right into it so that we can see what she's got to say and ask her all the questions.
Thanks, Robin. Hello, everyone. Just appreciate everyone joining us today for grant management and reporting. Again, my name is Quaylen Pipkin. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder of Pattern Consulting. We specialize working with small nonprofits and governments, really around building the compliance infrastructure they need to manage grants with confidence. We have about 60 minutes today. I want to be interactive. So if you have questions, please ask. This is why we're here. I try to really do practical kind of learning and give you real world examples that I've actually experienced within the last 6 months, actually. And so we're going to move through our topics pretty quickly, and I will leave time for questions. And let's get started. So here's a really quick roadmap of what we're going to do today. We're going to start with the life cycle of the grant, like what happens actually after you win the award. We'll cover how to build your grant management system. We'll talk about performance, reporting, financial management, compliance and risk, my favorite, and then funder communication. So each of the sections builds upon the other. Some pieces may be familiar with for you, and that's fine. But the connection of all of them together really what's important. Robin mentioned that templates will be available and they will be shared, and they may have been shared already, but they'll definitely go along, and we'll talk a little bit about them through the presentation. Before we dive in, I like to do a little bit of interactive stuff. So if you can drop your name, your organization, and then one word that describes your experience so far with grants in the chat, that would be great. And I cannot see the chat, so I probably need someone from Local First just to shout them out, or if you want to shout them out, that's also too, if you just want to tell me where you're from and kind of what's one word to describe your experience.
And I will keep an eye on the chat. I'm Rob. I'll go first real quick. Robin with Local First, and one word would be cat herding.
Okay, that's a good one. Love it. Anybody else want to share?
In the chat, there's some that say they have a lot of experience. There's an analysis. There's a newbie in the chat. So it looks like we have a little bit of everything.
Perfect. So it's good. I want you guys also to know that everyone is, like I always say, you can lean on each other. And so definitely lean on each other in the chat. If you find someone that has similar experience or organization, get their email so you can stay connected. And the other thing, just if you could just tell me, what is your biggest challenge right now with grants? I think that's pretty much probably why we're here. And so if you want to drop that in the chat too, and we can kind of look through that and concentrate on kind of those areas. And then just a few housekeeping notes. Chat freely. if you have a question, don't wait to the end, and happy just to like answer them as we go along. So just a little bit about me. That's me with straight hair. I spent nearly 20 years working in the intersection of local government, workforce development, community health, and grant system. Basically, this means I work both sides. In my daytime job, I work in philanthropy, so I'm a funder. On my consulting job, I really focus on being a compliance advisor, helping organizations really manage what comes after their award. And so my experience has really kind of helped me see both sides. What it's taught me that, winning a grant is half the battle. If your organization can't sustain funding long term because of compliance issues, that's something that like you got to think about beforehand. So today we're really here just to kind of build that structure for you.
I
Okay, so
will
let's
real quick, Quaylen, tell you some things that they said in the chat for challenges.
perfect.
There's some challenges or as a rural community, matching requirements can be real difficult. Organizing, form finding, applying are all mentioned in the chat.
Perfect. That's great. We'll talk about some of those things during this presentation. So let's start at the beginning. What actually happens after you win? A lot of organizations, they celebrate getting the grant, which is great. That's the first part. And then they really scramble how to figure out like, what do we do next? So we're going to talk about a clear framework for you to get started. So there are three parts of the grant life cycle. It's the award and kickoff, what happens during the grant, and then the closeout. I cannot say this enough. Please read your grant agreement. Please, please, please read it. That's one of the things that people are like, well, I don't know what my grant agreement says. Read the full agreement, know where you can spend money, what you can't do, your scope, your budget. This is the first thing you need to do, like day one of like setting up your project file. The things that need to be in there are your award letter, your budget, scope, reporting dates. I would also make sure you have your contact information for your program officer. Always do a kickoff call, introduce yourself, get really comfortable with them. One of the things I tell people, you don't call your grant officer after something has happened. You want to talk with them beforehand so you know what's going on. During that time period, when you get your grant, your job is really to make sure you're tracking like your approved budget and then what you're actually spending, and making sure you're communicating those changes to your program officer. Funders would rather hear that there's a problem beforehand than after. And then, like I said, the third portion is really about closeout. So you're going to pay attention to the difference between your grant end date and like the day that you have to liquidate your money. So, for example, I have a grant that I'm working with with a nonprofit. Their final day to spend money is September 30th. All of their reporting needs to be done in the month of November. And so they cannot spend after September. So that's just really one of the most important things to know, kind of like when you need to spend your funds. The last thing I'll say about the grant life cycle, document everything. Always keep an archive. The audit window for grants is very long. Oftentimes they will come back and ask to see stuff. So just always make sure you are keeping that information. Okay, so we're going to talk about kind of the infrastructure about managing your grant as well. It doesn't have to be complicated. Honestly, if it's simple, it's just much more easy to handle. And so the foundation of your grant management system is really the project file I talked about, and it can be an actual file paper or it can be on your computer. But it really should contain 5 things. Definitely your award agreement, your approved budget, Also, you're going to have your scope of work or your work plan that was approved by your funder. Your reporting deadlines are really important. Please do not miss your reporting deadlines. We talked about having your contact information for your program officer. And then the other thing that I included in your templates was a grant compliance checklist. These are really important. Having these accessible will like really change your life. You don't want to have to scramble through your email box to find them. If they're in a file, you know where they are, then it's perfect. The system's not perfect, but it works. And for smaller organizations in rural communities, definitely just recommend just having a file folder with all your information there. One of the questions I get asked a lot about grant management systems, I'm a one-person shop, so I'm the solo or one staff. I do basically Google Drive. I have one document. I have my calendar, and I have like my spreadsheet. And so if it's just you and one or two other people, I would suggest not making it complicated, keeping it simple. Just have the shared folder, single spreadsheet, and just don't overcomplicate things. Middle, if you're like in the middle, you have a small team, definitely have a shared drive. I would say light touches, definitely having a monthly staff meeting, talking about kind of where you are, making sure people are assigned like leads on different tasks. And just make sure you're managing, right? It's not a heavy lift, but it definitely is kind of like the right touch. If you are managing millions of dollars, I would say 2, 3, 4, 5 million. Please don't do it in an Excel sheet. You're going to need some sort of system. And as you grow, your requirements may change. And so I would say start with what makes sense to your organization. I would also check with peer organizations on seeing what they're using, or someone that's doing your auditing and things like that. The worst thing you could do is have this glorious system and nobody uses it and it goes to waste and it's complicated. So really just keep it simple is the best. Okay, we're trying to talk a little bit about performance reporting. This is where I see a lot of organizations get kind of tripped up. They're not collecting the information or categorizing it correctly from the start. And so this has really been a pain point for organizations. So I want to make the distinction between outputs, what you did, and outcomes. And it's huge, right? So outputs are kind of like, how many people did you serve? How many trainings did you do, right? Their funder really wants to know about what changed because they gave you that money. And so they want to know like what skills that the person that you serve, what did they gain? Or did they obtain a job? Did their income increase and things like that? Those are the results that funders really care about. And so the other point I will offer tip is that make sure you start collecting your data from the start. The worst thing you could do is we had an event, we collected data, we didn't do anything with it. I don't know where it is. It's on a scratch piece of paper. So I just would definitely make sure that your reporting is set. The other tip that I will share with you is that language matters. And so if your funder is using a different definition of participants served than you are, your numbers aren't going to match. And so you need to make sure that you're using the same language that your funder is using. Do you have any questions so far? None? Okay, guys. Can I ask? So I talked a little bit about kind of your tools. I'm not going to read them off here, but definitely these are some options. Definitely SharePoint, Google Drive are great. I use AI to like for my templates. So the templates I actually created for you were AI generated. It just makes it easier. I don't have to think about it. So I just encourage you to definitely use the tools that are available to you. And as you grow, you may need different things. And so just encourage you to kind of keep track of your team and what they're doing. And like I said, if you're managing less than $1 million, you may not need anything, a full system or Salesforce or anything like that. But if you're managing like real $4 or $5 million, definitely want to look at paid software. Some financial systems have like add-on grant management systems. So you may also want to check with your financial team to see if there's a grant module that you can also add on to your finance piece. Okay, financial management is another kind of place where problems happen. And so we just want to talk through that a little bit and we can have further conversations, but these are things that I have found recently. There really are three things that matter the most in financial management, kind of real-time tracking, what is allowable an expense, and then avoiding common pitfalls. Real-time tracking means that like you have your budget and you are every month going in and saying, I spent this much in travel, it's below or under. You want to really look for the variance in that. And so that is one of the templates that you were provided. This is something that I would suggest that like as soon as you get your monthly financial report of what you're spending, that you go in your burn down and you can basically track, because in that way you can see if you need to move money or not. Do not wait to the end of the month when your report is due to basically say, oh no, right? And so it's something that I tell people, I have a client right now, they go in their weekly to kind of see where they are and keep track. It's really up to you. The allowable expense test is my favorite. Is it in your budget? Like if you didn't say you're buying computers and it's not in your budget, don't do it. That's where I always say, was it pre-approved? Do you need funder approval? Is it reasonable? Is it necessary? And things like that. And so those are just kind of some tips. If you can't answer yes to some of these questions, then don't do it or ask your funder. Um, so I do have a real world scenario, which I think happens a lot. Um, there is something called indirect cost and grants, and a lot of them are in federal grants, but some funders allow this. I had a funder that had $1 million grant over 4 years. And it wasn't until November of last year that they realized that they could have charged a 15% indirect cost rate, meaning that basically, things that are like administrative, like maybe insurance or, your fiscal team or someone that is answering the phones for you, right? So they missed out on additional money. And so 4 years, $4 million, 15%, do the math. And so they left money on the table. And so that was one of the biggest mistakes. And so this is why I tell you, make sure you're reading your grant application first. If it says you can charge indirect, I don't want to say it's free money, it's available money for your organization. By the time they discovered it was possible, they can recoup a little bit of money, but they couldn't go back. So just make sure you are getting every dollar. The next section is really about compliance and risk. This is something that I think a lot of organizations just skip and they say, we'll do it later. And this is a lot of times where I get brought in because they've gotten some sort of finding from the federal government or a funder. And so they have me come in and say, we need to get out of this situation. And so there are kind of four areas when I talk about compliance and risk management. It really is about your procurement, what a subawardee versus a subcontractor, getting prior approvals, and then also your documentation. When it comes to procurement, I always tell people your organization needs to have a procurement policy, how you will procure goods and services, how you will subcontract with people and things like that. Oftentimes, your funder will also have requirements. You want to follow the most restrictive policy to keep you compliant. Um, I always tell people if you are going to purchase something, please always get three like quotes, right? It's just best practice in procurement. It's also a reminder that if you have someone you're already working with and you want to sole source them, it's just always really important that you have proper justification as to why you are not going out for bids or procurement. Keep it in the file because what will happen is when you're audited, they will come back and they will ask you, like, why did you sole source someone? Go ahead,
With
Robin.
that, Quaylen, when we're getting quotes for purchases and stuff, is it like a screen grab okay? Like if I'm looking at, I know I've purchased the Babbel earbuds. They, the ones that allow you to speak and translate, so that you can very for a very cheap cost work
Yeah.
with multiple people in different languages. Is just a screenshot of like what it would cost on Amazon good enough? Like if there's one from a website and one here on Amazon, is a screenshot enough? Does that count as a quote?
So I think it depends on your funder. I would say definitely with the federal government, they will definitely want something a little bit more formal. I always say emails are great, right? Or if you can like give me like a cost sheet, right, so I can see it. Oftentimes, like I said, sometimes verbal. I don't do verbal as a compliance person. People change their minds. So I always say if you can have some sort of documentation, I would definitely say screenshots. Probably, non-federal state funders may take that. I definitely would ask your program officer what their preference is. But definitely always, like I said, if you have, what do you need in all of your backups so you can show, yes, I went through three quotes. These are the dates. These were the costs so that someone can see. Additionally, like with sole source, I usually have a memo that I do to file as to why I am picking this contractor. And usually it's because they have some sort of, particular area of expertise. I recently had a client reach out to me. They were looking for someone that had workforce experience in behavioral health. That is my area of expertise. And so they were having a hard time finding a contractor. In that sense, that's a great opportunity to say, I sole source this person because of their experience, and I have not been able to find someone else. So the documentation is really key. It's part of the compliance part. So that's a really good question. Any other questions? You guys are quiet. Okay. The other thing is I just want to talk about kind of the difference between a sub awardee and a subcontractor. I think that gets kind of confused with some people. A subrecipient basically carries out part of your grant. The same rules that apply to you also to apply to them. And so just like someone is subbing you to do the work, you're subbing someone else. And so the same rules apply. A subcontractor is providing you a good or service for a fee. So to say you need someone to provide you with notebooks, right? That would be a subcontractor. And so creating basically getting that wrong, calling someone a subcontractor when they're really a sub awardee can cause you to have an audit finding. So I just wanted to make sure that you all know the difference. There is a difference. We talked about prior approvals, about budget modifications, scope changes, no cost extensions, even if your personnel change. Those are really things to communicate to your program officer. Say someone left, they were paid at a lower rate. Now you're hiring someone that's higher and it's at a higher rate. That affects your budget. So you just want to make sure that you are communicating that information. The other thing, and we kind of talked about, documentation is key. If it's not written, it did not happen. I say that all the time. A good practice is always you talk to your program officer. A good program officer will basically send you an email afterwards and say, this is what we talked about. If they do not, I would suggest that you say, hey, just following up to our conversation, just confirming these things. It's just a good practice to keep all of that documentation, receipts, invoices, and things like that. I also want to bring up a scenario, put these scenarios at the bottom. I had this actually happen. Board decided that they wanted to make a programmatic decision that was not in a grant scope. It wasn't allowable. The staff decided we're going to go with the board's decision. We're going to basically procure something. We're going to pay. We're not going to do procurement. We're going to just, hire the person. Person was on the board. There's a conflict. That was a no-no, right? They got their hands slapped by the funder because of several factors that they didn't have permission to move forward. The person that actually did the work was sitting on the board, which was a conflict of interest. They did not do proper procurement, meaning they didn't get 3 quotes. So I'm saying this to say city council, city manager, president, board member, you always need to make sure you go back and pause and check with your funder to make sure like what's allowed. This is a situation where we had to rectify it and go back and had to kind of tell the board, listen, if you have questions, you want to see if we can do it, we're going to have to check with our funder and we will come back to you. It's always okay to say we'll come back and we don't know. Um, Next, I just want to talk about communication and funder relations. This is one of the things that I feel is like underrated parts of grants management. As someone that sits on a funder side, it's always important you keep that really great relationship. Always introduce yourself. Always send brief updates just about what's going on. Just always touch base. I mean, we're human. We know you're human. We know you have things going on, but we want to just make things are okay. Oftentimes, program officers are managing multiple projects, and sometimes it's not that they forget, it's just that they have so much going on. So sometimes a check in is really great. When something goes wrong, just don't wait. I rather would you contact me, talk to me about what's going on, and how do we figure it out together. You are not alone. The other thing I will say is that, documentation, the communication is really key. If I told you I'm allowing and approving something, and then it comes back and I say, no, I didn't say that, you can always show me the email and say, no, Quaylen, on this date, we talked about this, and I have it in writing that you will approve. And so I just would definitely just recommend that document. Your program officer is your friend. They want you to be successful. And so it's just really important that you keep that communication with them. I don't have anything else. So if you have questions, happy to answer them. You can drop them in the chat. Definitely interested in hearing what you all have to say.
I have a quick question. Can you just go over the difference one more time in a little bit more detail about the difference between a sub-recipient and a subcontractor?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'll go back to the slide. So a subawardee, and so if, for example, your federal government, I'm going to use federal workforce, right? Because I implemented federal workforce programs, WIOA. We were a subawardee for the state of Arizona. And so they awarded us an amount. We're responsible for implementing programming and doing everything that comes with that. So how we move money, how we submit reports, all of that is basically it's an audit trail, right? And so you're a sub awardee. You're in the grant. You're responsible for its success. A subcontractor is someone like, I need someone to, give me water, or, like I having a big event. We're going to purchase water. They become a contractor, or a subcontractor. So they're just really, they're a vendor. They're providing a good or service to you, right? I would be considered a subcontractor for Local First Arizona. I am providing a service to Local First. I am not part of their contract. I'm just delivering something for Local First. That is an example of the difference between a sub awardee and a subcontractor.
Thank you. And I do have a question here in the chat. It says OMB just issued sweeping proposed changes.
They
Um,
did.
they did. I'm curious how you see some of those impending updates impacting your clientele. Also, can you just go into OMB for a second, just in case nobody catches what you know what I mean, what OMB is? So OMB
Yeah.
sweeping changes.
Yeah, so I have not had a chance to read them. I will read them, but it's really scary. I will tell you one of the biggest things I have noticed, federal compliance always changes. One of the biggest things that has changed in the federal landscape is the amount of money that they will give you and the level of service. And so the level of service has like basically we want you to do more with like the same amount of money. Um, Things like that are it affects a lot of things. So I always reference the CFRs, and so I follow the CFRs, and so they make these changes, and then they go in the CFRs, and so I have to watch the CFRs, and so that tells me basically how to do things and if it's allowed. So the biggest example is I have and this is a problem because someone did not read the regulations, and so I have not a nonprofit right now. Their grant was approved and it should not have been approved because it didn't follow the federal guidance, right? And so the changes will be impactful. Like I said, I have not read through them, but what I have seen is that there's a little bit of nervousness, particularly when it comes to kind of the compliance aspect. I don't worry so much for government because a lot of government will have their legal team will review and tell you how it'll impact you. The biggest impact is going to be the nonprofits and understanding like how that will impact them and how like compliance is affected. If you do not know a lot about federal regulations, it can be tricky. And so I definitely would say if you're applying for federal grants, make sure your legal team is reviewing it and the consequences. There is a comment period. And so I would suggest, have your teams read through them and make sure that you're inputting comments for the Fed so they know how it'll impact you.
And I can also speak up a little bit to this question, a little bit on some of these revisions that are going on. I've tried to keep up a little bit. And so it's the proposed revisions, and there's kind of three objectives. They're trying to improve transparency, accountability, and oversight. They are clarifying the regulatory status of those TCFRs, and they're trying to reduce the award recipient burden. But what we're finding is that a lot of these the changes that we'll have to some of the clientele will be the policies and regulations that you have as an organization, as you were talking about, like the board, uh, your procurement, things like that. So it'll be changed up high, and what we're thinking is that there'll have to be policy updates internally, which is what one of the changes will be. Is a lot of that will need to be done in order, like you said, to even now apply for the grant. You have to show that structure. You have to show XYZ. So if those changes aren't made and don't adhere to those new ones, if they change procurement and your policies haven't updated and you send in your organizational structure and policies and those don't those don't match up, then you are now disqualified from the grant, is one of the ways that we'll see that.
So
And
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say that's interesting because I think that all of that happens on the back end now. And so, not having a lot of organizations don't have procurement, conflict of interest. And so they are scrambling to get all those policies in place. And so if the federal government is asked, the burden is like upfront, right? And so that's an interesting one. So
And there is another question. Do we have to match the grant amount exactly in each category of the grant? Of course, making sure we do not go over the total grant amount.
So I always tell people be conservative. Some grants, it depends. I'm working on a federal grant right now, Promise Neighborhoods, for an organization. They have a 10% match requirement. And part of that is like private sector match. It usually will tell you in the NOFA, which is the Notice of Funding Availability, or in the RFP, whatever foundation or funder it's doing. So it just depends. I've also seen where like be careful putting a number. Um, that is tricky. If you say you're going to do $2 million worth of in-kind support, how are you going to track that? And what happens if you don't get to 2 million? So I would just definitely say read your the RFP, check with the what the federal match is. Some grants don't have it, but some do. But I would always say lean conservatively. A lot of times it's kind of in kind match from like staff and usually a percentage and stuff like that. So it just really depends on the funder.
Thank you. Christina, I see your hands raised if you want to come off you mute.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for the webinar. Quaylen, this was really wonderful and I'm learning a lot. So I also really appreciate the templates that you sent out. Do you think you could walk through sort of the process of like looking for the grant, applying, and then kind of the next steps after that? I think being a bigger organization and organizing all the grants, I think that would be really helpful because it's kind of something I'm learning right now.
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, I have several things that I do. So there are websites out there where you can pay to subscribe to get like what grants are out there. I do that for certain clients. And so, there's lots of them and they range from like foundations. There's also one, I don't want to name drop any, but there's one that you can see where they funded, who they funded, the amounts. So when you do your applications, you know how much to ask for. I am on LinkedIn a lot and I'm in different like workforce and health things. And so I have a lot of people, a lot of grant writers that they post things and I like snatch it down and I'll forward and stuff like that. Sometimes people send me stuff. I'm like, I've never even heard of that. But I definitely think that it's an art form. The other thing I will tell you is that uh, uh, funders hang out in certain places. I just came from a convening for all grant makers in health, right? And so I would suggest also looking at some of these kind of funding collaboratives and see who's in there. The one that grant makers in health, we're the company I work for full time. We fund globally, but there were a lot of funders that were like there from, they counties or cities are localized. And so I think there definitely there's like a funder community that people think, oh, I'll just Google and go online or use a grants, finder system. But I would say, as someone who works in philanthropy, if you can find out where funders are going and go there, you will have a great chance of running into someone. A lot of times, I will tell you, there are like the one I went to was only for funders. But I go to a lot of conferences where I run into funders and strike up relationships with them and just by talking. And so I think that's a strategy, like building relationships with funders is really, really important. We want to know what you're doing, how you do it. I have a grantee that I fund right now. We've funded them for the last 2 years. They're in Africa. I actually went to see their work, and it was so impactful and so powerful that we want to continue to fund them. And so oftentimes I think what organizations forget is like you get the money and like you never hear from them again. No, invite them to events and things and show them what you're doing and share those stories. You really want your funders to be there for long term and invest in you. The other thing I will say, funders usually will give you a little bit of seed money, see what you do with it, and then they'll give you more. But honestly, just hang out where funders are. That's the best strategy.
Do you have a certain template that we sent out that you might want her to ask any questions on, like the actual grant reporting one? I think we sent out a compliance checklist, a grant management reporting checklist. There's the management outline and the grant burn down, spend down. Is there one that you'd like her to hit? Maybe the spend down or just the overall management one? Can you do that, Quaylen?
Yeah, I should have pulled it up.
No worries. While you pull that up, I am actually no worries. While Quaylen pulls that up, I'm going to put in the chat for more about the OMB question. And again, it's really great. It really breaks it down. Again, I'll just go over some of the key takeaways real quick. It's from guidance to regulation. So when we talked about the updating the policies and stuff, it's the DEI language. That is what they are talking about. And I'm going to put this into the chat. It absolutely goes through, breaks it down a little, talks about how it might affect you or your organization. Yes, it's a little long, but like there's the main key takeaways. It's absolutely something that you can go through and kind of be prepared, see how it might affect you. Another key takeaway is under the proposed rule, institutions with lower IDC rates will receive preferred treatment, things of that nature. There's also changes to termination and suspension authority, and some of the framework foreign collaboration restrictions. You're probably already aware of those. You see those in especially federal documents, your city CDBGs for, you'll see it as the American Steel, the de minimis. You've seen it in not having materials from Israel. So you've seen some of these before. They're just kind of some new ones. It's a really great website. Again, it looks like a lot. It does chunk it down for you and give you those big, bold key takeaways that will kind of help you get thinking, and again, thinking about what you might have to change internally, getting that process going, be it policies, be it your procurement regulations, all of that stuff. In some ways, it'll be in your contract, such as like when I used to do CDBG, and I used to write those, run those, all of it. We had to change our contract as the American Steel and de minimis became a thing, as sourcing from Israel became a thing. You'll just have to kind of update some of those blueprints that you might have, or those boilerplate templates that you have, especially if you're an organization that is continuing to do the same federal grants over and over and over. You're just going to want to make sure that you check through those, check the wording, check your procurement. That website should help you. All right, Quaylen, go ahead.
Perfect. So this is just a suggestion. This is just kind of an outline. This is what I normally use with my clients. And so it basically has all the information that we talked about that should be in your folder, right? So this is like your work plan, right? And so it basically milestones activity tracker, right? And so, one of the milestones is award kickoff call with the program officer. Who is responsible? What's the date it's going to occur? When do you want to do it? What's the status? It's just a way of like keeping track, right, in an Excel sheet. So if you have a grants management actually system, you normally can use that, right? I know a lot of people are using Microsoft Project. You can use Microsoft Project Plan, anything like that. It just depends on you. It depends on your client. A lot of my clients, they don't have systems. And so what I do is create a Google, folder in a Google Drive. I put all these documents in, I go in and update it where we are, and things like that. So it should be fluid and flexible. Basically, depending on your like what the milestone is, then you put it on there. I think some of the other things you talk about, there's a little bit of a like spend breakdown here too. It's kind of high level. These are the normal kind of categories. That's your approved budget. You can put in how much you spent the date and how much you have remaining. And so if that means you need to go back to your program officer and you've noticed you're spending more in equipment than in consultants, then you can, say, hey, I need to do a budget modification. But it's just basically high level. These are the things that you need to do in order to like keep track. But like I said, if you're using a grants management system, they're pretty sophisticated now that they like have all that information. And normally it's connected to your financial system. I would definitely use this if you're just starting out or really small.
And then what was the other great one you sent out? Let's see here.
So see. I had the budget spend down.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let's talk about that. I know there was somebody had spoken about budget spend down and sometimes not hitting one category over the other. That kind of sheet might help you figure that out faster and then get with your funder officer to see if we can, you know what I mean, to see if you're able to move that around. So this is a really great tool again to show that there might be a problem before there's a problem so you can contact the funder.
Yeah, and usually your program officer will like know that if you're not hitting your targets, because what'll happen is that you'll submit a budget. Some funders will say, they just want an annual budget. The feds usually like to see like how much you're going to spend like monthly. Um, and if you get to a point where you're like halfway through and you haven't spent like all your money, you're going to get a phone call from your program officer. And so the idea is that you should be keeping track and know where you are before your program officer even like calls you. And so if you know that you're, 6 months in and you've only spent 20 or 30% of your budget, then it's time for you to kind of start looking at like what needs to happen. Where do I need to change? Am I spending more in one category? Is my budget too high and stuff like that? And so it just really depends. But this again is a monthly tracker. If you don't have fiscal staff to help you to keep track, I definitely would say use this. If you do, if you're using QuickBooks or some sort of other financial, your financial people should be able to like budget everything for you and run you a very nice monthly report. When I worked for the city of Phoenix, I used to get those monthly and we would have monthly meetings with our budget staff. This is really for, you know, small organizations that don't have the fiscal capacity or they don't have the staff. Also, like I said, what's the variance? Like, if you notice you're supposed to be spending, 25,000 in staff a month and you only spent 10, what happened? Is it because you're not fully ramped up? And and so your program officer will ask you questions like, what's going on? And so if you're supposed to be spending $25,000 a month and the next 6 months you only spend 10, they're going to ask you like, do you need all those positions? Because they don't want the money to go to waste. They want to either reprogram it in another category and they want to take it and give it to another organization so they know that they'll spend it.
Great, thank you. And there's another question. Are you ready?
Sure.
In your experience, is a movement transfer of money budgeted between existing approved categories allowable up 10% of the budget without a budget modification? Or are you seeing that agencies require approval no matter the amount of the adjustment?
I think it depends on the agency. Any movement, federal and state, I would always check anything, because what you don't want to do is move it yourself, because moving it yourself and not getting approval, you want your program officer to let you know if you need to do a modification or not. And so those are the types of questions that I would just go directly to your program officer. They will tell you yes or no. I have people come to me, it's like simple, like, hey, it's $300 over, and I'll be like, no, it's not worth the paperwork. But if you're doing like major changes, I would say it's just better to have that conversation with them. And the federal and state budgets are usually, they're pretty sticklers for that. So I would just always ask and not make an assumption and let them tell you what they want you to do. And normally with, this is just a good practice in general. Before you submit anything, I would always submit a draft to your program officer to review, because what they can tell you before you submit it, that like if you need to update or change something, so when you submit it, it just gets approved. Because oftentimes, people fill out the form or something, or they'll make the request, and then the program officer will send it back for changes. And so if you can kind of operate in that draft phase until your program officer says, yes, it looks good, you should submit it. I would suggest doing that.
That's fantastic advice. Are there any more questions? We are about done here. We have about 5 more minutes. So now is the time to ask any questions. If not, we'd really just like to thank everybody for coming out today, taking part in this web series, just being proactive in your grant management and your just grant opportunities. There's another question. Oh no, there's a thank you. You're welcome. We just want to thank everybody. We have a few more going on in this series. I'm sure a lot of you have signed up. We really look forward to having everybody at the next ones. Also, Quaylen, you are amazing. We urge you to reach out to her, whether you are eligible for Local First Services support, yes or no. She is always available. As you can see, she's very experienced. We love having her here. Please reach out to her with any questions or projects that you may be interested in for her. And after this, in a few days, there will be an email sent to everybody that has the recording, has these templates, has everything that we need. If you need anything, please reach out to Local First. And I hope everybody has an absolutely wonderful day. And thank you for coming out.
Thank you. Bye.